is BBC World News. I'm Nuala McGovern. Our top stories. Donald Trump becomes the first former US president to face criminal charges. The charges are thought to relate to falsifying business records to hide hush money payments to a porn star.
The unprecedented indictment of a former president of the United States for a campaign finance issue is an outrage.
Former Paralympic champion Oscar Pistorius, who was convicted of murdering his girlfriend, is denied an early release from prison. A UK cricket disciplinary hearing upholds charges against several players over the use of a racial slur. Former Yorkshire cricketer Azim Rafiq says the sport needs to end institutional racism for good.
One of the core reasons for me speaking out was for the game to get better. And I think it's really, that test really starts now.
President Zelensky attends ceremonies being held in Bucha a year since the town was recaptured by the Ukrainian army. Hello and welcome to BBC World News. Donald Trump has become the first former US president to face a criminal prosecution. The precise charges against him have not yet been made public, but they're thought to relate to falsifying business records to hide a payment to a porn star during the 2016 election campaign. It's alleged that Stormy Daniels was paid off in exchange for her silence about an alleged affair. Mr. Trump denies any wrongdoing, calling the indictment political persecution and election interference. Our North America correspondent John Sedworth reports.
The massed ranks of the media say it all. Donald Trump's provided plenty of big moments in American politics, but few bigger than this, his own imminent arrest.
This is an ABC News special report. Now reporting, David Muir.
Good evening. We're coming on the air a bit earlier than usual because of breaking news at this hour. A grand jury here in New York City has just handed up an indictment against former President Donald Trump.
The news was confirmed in an angry statement from the former president, blaming his political opponents. The Democrats, he said, have done the unthinkable. The case against him centres on this woman, the porn star known as Stormy Daniels. Ahead of Trump's 2016 election win, she was paid $130,000 to stop her going public with claims she'd had an affair with him, something he denies. His fixer and lawyer, Michael Cohen, was convicted over that payment, along with other charges, back in 2018. Since out of jail, he's been giving evidence to the grand jury that's now decided charges are warranted.
This is not revenge, right? What this is about accountability. I don't want to see anyone, including Donald Trump, indicted, prosecuted, convicted, incarcerated, simply because I fundamentally disagree with them. This is all about accountability. He needs to be held accountable for his dirty deeds.
The big question is whether Mr. Trump knew about the hush money. Although his organisation ultimately footed the bill, he's always denied any knowledge.
Did you know about the $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels?
Unless he refuses to comply, at some point in the next few days, Donald Trump will have to come here to New York. He'll be booked and fingerprinted in the building behind me there, have the charges read to him and enter a formal plea in front of a judge. It's an extraordinary moment, the first president in US history to be arrested.
Ensuring that when a Manhattanite...
The charges have been brought not by federal prosecutors, but by the Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, a Democrat. Now a key figure in the Trump campaign's claim that this is politics, not justice at work. For a media-savvy populist eyeing the White House again, Donald Trump may see electoral advantage in all this. His opponents, though, will be hoping a man who's long overridden the usual rules of the political game is about to be brought down with a bump. John Sudworth, BBC News, New York.
President Joe Biden has been asked about Donald Trump. Let's hear what he had to say.
Your reaction to President Trump's indictment?
Are you worried this will further divide our country, the indictment?
I have no comment on that.
Mr. President. Possible protest in the wake of the indictment?
No, I'm not going to talk about Trump's indictment.
Under rule of law that former presidents indicted, what is the rule of law in our country?
I have no comment at all on Trump.
Mr. President, charges against Trump are politically motivated.
I have no comment on Trump.
So no comment there from Joe Biden. Well, former Vice President Mike Pence, he labelled the Donald Trump indictment a political persecution and criticised the Manhattan District Attorney for campaigning to bring charges against him.
Well, first, let me just say, I think the unprecedented indictment of a former president of the United States for a campaign finance issue is an outrage. And I think it's clear to the overwhelming majority of the American people that this is nothing short of a political prosecution being affected by a Manhattan DA who literally campaigned on bringing charges against one particular American. And I must tell you that that should be offensive to every American, left, right, and center. Every American deserves equal treatment under the law. And I believe the American people will see this for what it is.
Barney Moore, an Alabama Republican congressman and also Trump supporter, gave his reaction.
I'm certainly not surprised the way the left in this country has went after Donald Trump, but I'm certainly disappointed at the same time because it makes the American people question the fairness of the justice system in our country. And I think in a lot of ways it hurts the process going forward to get a fair trial in a lot of cases. And in my district, people worry about the weaponization of the DOJ against conservatives. And I think Donald Trump is the tip of the spear in that respect. The American people see what's happening to him, and it's concerning.
Well, what about the other argument that no one is above the law? These are criminal matters, nothing to do with politics, and he should have to answer for them.
Well, if they hadn't spied on his campaign, if they hadn't called Russia collusion for an election, if they hadn't accused him of doing some things that were illegal against Ukraine, and then hadn't raided his closet a few weeks ago, and then Hunter Biden had a laptop the whole time we knew about that nothing was reported, it kind of falls on kind of deaf ears over here when you say nobody's above the law, when it seems like the left and the Democrats are always above the law.
And what about where this goes? Because politically there are those that are saying that actually what happens next week, the images that come out of that, plays into Donald Trump's narrative and actually could potentially help him.
Yeah, Lewis, I think I'm glad you mentioned that. You see, the prosecutor is over here in this part of the country, but that small spot of blue is going to mobilize the entire country of red.
And indeed, he was speaking there to my colleague Lewis Vaughan Jones, thanks to him. I'm joined now by Idris Calhoun, Washington Bureau Chief at The Economist. Great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us. Just picking up on a little of what the Republican congressman was saying there, I'm wondering what you think the political or potential ramifications there might be with this particular case at a time, of course, that it's so politically divisive in the country?
Well, it's not just the congressman. It's almost unanimous among Republicans who are in support of the president, including would-be rivals in the presidential contest ahead. You saw Vice President Pence say that he believes this is a political prosecution. He's thought to be seeking the nomination pretty soon. Ron DeSantis, who is the Florida governor, who is thought of as Trump's closest rival for the nomination, has also said not only that he thinks that this is a political persecution, but that he would not aid New York in an extradition request, which may be unconstitutional. But you see that whenever, and we saw this with the raid that happened in Mar-a-Lago, which was also a history-breaking precedent, that whenever these happen, all Republicans feel the need to gather around Donald Trump and voice their support. That will make it harder for a challenger to emerge in the primary election. We're already seeing that Donald Trump is doing better in the polls for the primary ahead. It might hurt him in the general election. I think a mugshot is not going to be the campaign photo that a lot of Americans want. But in the short run, I think it might well aid Donald Trump.
So they are some of the Republicans that are supporting him that you mentioned. But do you think something like this, is there any part of his base that might be turned away from him by it?
There is, but you know, we've seen many instances of Trump in close scrutiny. We saw the Mueller investigation that led to the first impeachment. We saw the second impeachment. We saw the repercussions of January 6th. And there, if you look at public opinion polls, you see a dip that occurs among Republicans, some of whom are turned off by the antics, but that eventually recovers. And, you know, there is a contingent of the party that is never Trump. A lot of them have already been exercised from positions of power. People like Liz Cheney no longer hold office. So So, just going by that history and going by what's happened before, I think you have to conclude that we've all seen this movie before, and there isn't a reason to think that this is necessarily going to be the breaking point when so many other moments that could have been weren't.
So they have set a time, haven't they, that it will be on Tuesday, I believe, the next day, when so many people will be looking towards it. How does it feel in Washington, in the United States? Is it the thing that everybody's talking about?
Yeah, it's a history-breaking moment. Even Richard Nixon, after Watergate, didn't have to suffer the indignity of a trial. He was given a presidential pardon. Of course, that was after he agreed, basically, to leave political life, and shame had more currency then than it does now. There's no precedent for it. There's no precedent for a prominent presidential candidate to run while under indictment. I mean, just the sentence alone, the fact that these are hush money payments for an alleged affair with a former porn actress, I mean, that would have been enough to end most people's campaigns. But for Donald Trump, it doesn't really stop him. So much of this is extraordinary.
Idris, thanks so much. Idris Calhoun joining us from The Economist, the Washington bureau chief. Let's get more on this story now with my colleague Katty Kay, who's our US special correspondent and one of the hosts of the BBC podcast Americast. Katty, I will give a shout out to Americast. I was listening to it as this indictment was coming in, and there's so many strands, aren't there, really to explore with it. And I was wondering what your take is on why prosecutors decided to follow this path, that of potentially, allegedly, hush money being paid to Stormy Daniels and falsifying business records, although we don't know for sure, right?
Yeah, I mean, we don't know what the charges are. We'll have to wait until Donald Trump's court appearance next Tuesday to get those. But I don't think it is the case that they have only followed this path. There are those other cases that are being investigated against Donald Trump. The question of whether he interfered with the election in the state of Georgia in 2020, his ties to January the 6th and the riot on Capitol Hill that's being investigated by the Department of Justice, and also being investigated by the Department of Justice, those documents, those classified documents that he had down in Mar-a-Lago. All of those cases still ongoing, all of those investigations still happening, and one or potentially all three of them could also lead to indictments against Donald Trump. I think it's just the case that the Manhattan District of Attorney went first. And now there are some Democrats who are kind of saying, well, we wish he hadn't gone first, because actually, if you look at those four cases, this is perhaps the least serious of all of them, and they wish that if Donald Trump were going to be indicted on anything, that he was indicted on one of those more serious charges. But it doesn't preclude those other cases from going forward.
What do you think it will mean looking at the presidential election, which will be coming up next year? You know, court cases, they can obviously be drawn out. How are you seeing the timing of this particular indictment?
I just don't know what it means. I mean, to be totally honest, I don't think anyone knows what it means exactly. And if they tell you they do, I wouldn't trust them. I'm hearing from Democrats that this is bad news for Donald Trump, and I'm hearing from Republicans that this is good news for Donald Trump. We don't even know when the trial is going to take place. It could be, from what I've heard from prosecutors, at least a year before Donald Trump goes for trial. It's going to be time consuming for him. He's going to have to appear in court at some point. That could be a distraction from his campaign. It could also be a rallying point for his supporters. This could unfold in myriad ways. And I just think we don't know yet, because these are uncharted waters.
Thanks so much, my colleague Katty Kay. And again, you can check out Americast, their podcast, for all the updates on this story. Now, King Charles' 3-day tour of Germany has come to a close. The last event of the trip for the monarch and Queen Consort was a reception with Hamburg residents and members of the local British community. They were accompanied by Germany's President, Frank-Walter Steinmeier. It is the first state visit of Charles's reign. Let's turn to South Africa now. The Paralympic star Oscar Pistorius has been denied parole in South Africa. That is according to the Department of Correctional Services. But now there is confusion about whether he was even eligible to apply for it in the first place. Here's our Africa correspondent Andrew Harding to explain what happened.
Earlier today, South African prison officials insisted that Oscar Pistorius had served half his sentence and therefore qualified for parole. The parole hearing went ahead. The Paralympic athlete gave evidence explaining why he felt he behaved well in prison and deserved to be set free. The family of Reeva Steenkamp, his victim, also testified, arguing that he should not be released because he had not shown sufficient remorse. And then, suddenly, prison officials came out and revealed some stunning news, that in fact this whole parole hearing should not have gone ahead, that they had received recently, in fact 3 days ago, new legal advice explaining that because of the way you calculate the number of days he's served in prison, he's not actually due to qualify for parole until next August 2024. And so he remains in prison for now. There is, I think, some sense of real shock and frustration with the way this has been handled. There's an element of farce here, really. None of this should have taken place today. And at heart, this is a confusion because Oscar Pistorius was actually sentenced twice. His initial sentence was appealed, and therefore there's been a debate and uncertainty about which days in prison should count and which should not.
Thanks very much to Andrew Harding there. And Ms Steenkamp's family released the following statement. They say, while we welcome today's decision, today is not a cause for celebration. We miss Reeva terribly and will do so for the rest of our lives. We believe in justice and hope that it continues to prevail. Do stay with us on BBC World News. Still to come, we'll be finding out why Italy is the first Western country to ban the AI chatbot ChatGPT.
Now is the time for a new impulse. Moving from a stable ground to a tipping point. Now is the time to be ahead. Now is the time for agility, for sustainable acts. Now is your time.
Let's turn to the UK. A further highly critical report into Yorkshire Cricket Club following allegations of racism by former player Azim Rafiq has upheld complaints of racism against 5 former teammates, but has cleared Michael Vaughan, the ex-England captain and BBC pundit, of using racist language. The report by the Cricket Discipline Commission is the latest into claims into historical racism by Rafiq, which he first made in 2020. Let me turn to Dr. Thomas Fletcher, an expert on race, diversity and equality in cricket from Leeds Beckett University. A long time coming. I think a lot of people were waiting for this, and I know Michael Vaughan does take a lot of the headlines with this story, but there were so many other allegations that were upheld. Can you talk our viewers through it? And welcome.
Thank you for having me. Yes, I think it is important to identify that, you know, Vaughan was not the only person kind of under investigation as part of this. There were 5 other players involved in that who were former Yorkshire County Cricket Club players, and the allegations made against them were upheld. I think we need to be clear about this, that Rafiq had said all along that this was never supposed to be about individuals, and the inquiry has made it about individuals, and I think we need to move away from that.
What will happen to those other 5 where the allegations were upheld? Do we know?
Not yet. I think that when we were told that the findings were going to be revealed today, it was made clear that the sanctions that were going to be imposed on those individuals, as well as Yorkshire County Cricket Club, were going to be made within the next, whether it be week, 2 weeks or so. So no, we don't know yet. I think most people will be watching with bated breath. In particular, I think the sanctions that will be levelled against the cricket club itself for historical association will be, you know, probably the most important at this moment in time.
There is a report due out in the autumn. You know, people were very much encouraged to come forward to tell their stories. Are we beginning to get any idea of just how diffuse, that this was as an issue in cricket clubs?
Yeah, so you're referring to the Independent Commission for Equity in Cricket, whose report has been delayed on a number of occasions. And I think, the outcome of today will be creating a bit of a clamour for that to be released ASAP, I think, as that was a more national investigation. I think that the findings of that will probably be quite damning to the sport. The nature of the inquiry was effectively to draw upon people's experiences of racism and discrimination. And I'm sure if you go looking for it, you will find it as you would in any sport. So people will be waiting to hear, to hear those findings. I don't think that anybody really associated with any sport would be surprised to hear that discrimination exists, at some levels, if not all levels, in certain pockets of the sport. The way that cricket needs to address this now going forward is, how does it come through the other side? So
to interrupt you there, though, Doctor, because I felt when Azim Rafiq was speaking that he did feel some of it was intrinsically more linked to cricket than some other sports, for example, that you wouldn't consider all sports in the same way. But you're saying that you would?
I don't think that you can necessarily tar every sport with the same brush. I think what's important here is just to keep emphasising that cricket will not be alone in this, and Yorkshire County Cricket Club will not be alone in it either. Now, Yorkshire have held their hands up and said, we've made mistakes and we know that there are issues. We know in other counties, Essex has been identified, as have others, where, accountability has been made. The point that I'm making is that the particular inquiry that we're talking about, the very public inquiry that the CDC have conducted, is specifically into Yorkshire County Cricket Club and into those 6 individuals. And what I'm saying is that we need to look beyond those 6 individuals now to look at the game in general across the county system, whether that be at the professional level, whether it be at the amateur levels, whether it be in coaching, whether it be in spectating.
I understand.
Because the game itself needs a refresh and it needs a thorough examination of itself.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thomas Fletcher, coming on. No doubt a lot of people will be awaiting that report. I want to turn to some technology news now, as Italy has become the first Western country to block the advanced chatbot ChatGPT. The Italian Data Protection Authority said there were privacy concerns relating to the model, which was created by the US startup OpenAI and is backed by Microsoft. The regulator said it would ban and investigate OpenAI with immediate effect. So millions of people, as you might know, have used this chatbot since it launched in November 2022. It can answer questions using human-like language. Let us bring in Will Guide, who has been looking at this ban, technology journalist. Good to have you with us, Will. Why do you think Italy, privacy concerns, I read, data protection, what's really behind it? How do you understand it?
Well, if you told me at 9 o'clock this morning this would be a story that broke today, I simply would not have believed you. This has come out of absolutely nowhere. There's been some concerns around privacy on the platform, but we haven't had any governments suggesting they were going to do anything close to this. Now, the regulator in Italy has come out with a statement saying this is a temporary measure until ChatGPT respects privacy. Quite a strong statement that they've suggested there. Now, this is interesting because we don't know how many users there were for ChatGPT in Italy. There's 100 million people have been using ChatGPT over the last several months. It's only been around since November. But the interesting thing from this is it all goes back to the Italian regulator suggesting that algorithms that are made to train. So what happens in these artificial intelligence systems? They're being trained by all the information that you put into it. It's learning, in quotation marks, from what you're putting into it. And what they're suggesting is there's currently no legal precedent in Italian or EU law that enables this to happen. And if that's the case, I'm pretty confident there's no law in any country in Europe, because we are very slow at adapting to technology and rules when they come through. So you could find, theoretically, a load of different countries following Italy, and maybe the whole of the EU following with this ban, until you get into a situation where OpenAI and their big funders now, Microsoft, get this together and have the conversations that are required. It's a surprise for me as somebody that's followed the tech industry for 20 years. This has happened so very quickly.
Well, everything happens quick with ChatGPT, it seems. Will, I've just got about a minute or so, but I know the UK wanted to kind of be a leader when it came to AI. What do you think this Italian ruling might mean? And obviously they're not in the EU anymore.
Well, this will be really interesting as to whether the UK reacts to this in any way. We've seen TikTok being banned on government devices following concerns in other countries, but I know that the UK government are very keen to position themselves at the front of AI and AI development. And the idea that a country can ban a piece of AI technology on the basis of privacy seems to set the argument for AI in that country back by a certain period of time. So let's see what happens over the next few days and weeks. I really don't know where this one's going next.
Yeah, and of course you're looking at Italy there, but do you think globally, we're talking about the EU, the UK, globally, are they watching Italy, do you think, or could possibly follow?
Yeah, well, it's already banned in countries like Russia, China, North Korea. No big surprises there. I can't see it being banned in the US because obviously Microsoft's such a huge investor in it now. But let's see what happens in other countries. I know people will be listening, and this has been a really big surprise. Nobody expected this,
Okay.
at 9 a.m. this morning.
Okay, well, thank you for bringing us up to date. Just a number of hours later, Will Guyatt, our technology journalist, joining us to talk about those chatbots that seem to be becoming incredibly popular. Thanks for watching. Do stay with us on BBC if you can.
Hello. Parts of the United Kingdom, France, the Low Countries, Germany being